Welcome to Innovating Music, a podcast from the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation. I'm your host, Dr. Gigi Johnson. Dennis Murcia is our guest this week, talking about innovation as the solving of a problem. He started in rock radio and A&R for Shakira at one point in time with Sony Music, and now is global business development with Codiscos. He's going to talk about the growing pains from innovation and the unique changes happening in the Latin urban market and his experiences in dealing with those growing pains.
I started working in rock radio here in the United States. So my first job was in Texas, in Houston, Texas, for a radio station called 104 KRBE, which was in the 90s, so early to mid 90s. And this is when Nirvana was hot. This is when Pearl Jam, the whole grunge and alternative movement was big. And it was a station that combined that music with some of the pop, like Alanis Morissette and some of the 90s pop. So Sheryl Crow. These are the ones that ring a bell. Radiohead, but Radiohead is more of the alternative genre. So from then I went on to work for television, and then I got a job consulting for a huge radio group in Latin America that had stations in Colombia and Chile, and one in France for some reason. And from then I met, then I went to work for Sony Music to become Shakira's A&R. That was
wait. Again, got to stop right there. How did you end up being Shakira's A&R, and how was that?
How did I end up getting that job, that gig? That was a great gig. I was consulting for a huge radio group. And they knew that my background was, I came from the American side also. So they were looking for somebody with an international profile, somebody who was a musician, who had a sensibility for music. I had always dreamed about working for A&R. And I didn't know the difficulty it was going to be, because I guess it's better to work for radio when people have to come to you to sell you stuff.
Yeah.
But then I went to A&R, which is my dream, my passion. So I went, I did that, and they said, hey, look, you have a big responsibility here. We have this up and coming artist that you may want to check out. And there was a few. So when I arrived there, I kept a few, I got rid of a few, and I ended up working with Shakira during her international development stage, which was I guess 98. That's when they were interested in releasing her on a larger level. So she was more of a local artist back then, and so I helped with her international promotion, I guess.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it was a great gig. It was a great gig, yeah.
So for a dozen years now, you have been working to increase the sort of digital savvy and sophistication and connections. You've seen a lot in the past 12 years then, looking at this on the international platform.
Yes. A lot of change. We've seen changes since, I guess last 12 years is 2005. So, yeah, what happened since then? We iPods, iPhones, the whole growth of streaming, YouTube. So the whole game has changed. The death of the CD, I guess it's a slow death, but it's happening. It's on its last leg, I guess. But yes, there's a lot of changes since then that have happened, and we've had to adapt. So, and those things have been really important. At first, a lot of resistance towards streaming. Should we do this? Resistance towards downloads. So a lot of it has been convincing people that this is good, convincing people that change is good, and
change good? I
think change is a given. Change is something you can't really change. Change is something that you have to accept. And I guess the easier you adapt, the better. If you don't adapt, you die. So you have to adapt to change. So if you always keep your eyes open for how things are going, you can adapt. If not, for example, what happened to a lot of labels and the change of the century, when the .com era. Nobody wanted to license anything to the streaming services. Nobody wanted to talk to technology companies. Nobody wanted to talk to internet companies. And then Napster came along, and pulled the rug underneath everybody's feet. So you have to adapt. And then everybody's like, no, we don't want Napster. We have to sue them. And then you get into this whole different game. But the consumer wanted Napster. The consumer wanted this, celestial jukebox that we still talk about. And the consumer wanted it, and the labels wouldn't listen. So you have to be open to change. You have to.
So that's assuming that someone's are creating change. So maybe change, and the flip side of adapting to change is the innovation side, which is one of the themes of this podcast. What do you see that's then driving the innovation? Just because the consumer wants it, or what is innovation to you?
Innovation is the solving of a problem. So there's always problems in the industry or in any industry, and somebody has to come along and solve it. So innovation happens, I think, when somebody says, this can be better, this can be done better, or there must be a better way, and that's when innovation happens, which is great. So, for example, you know, let's go back 15 years. People had people had to handle mail. Let me mail you my CD. Let me mail you my promo kit. Now it's all digital. Let me just send you a link. A lot more convenient. I'd rather get a link than somebody send me a folder with a piece of paper and a picture and 8x10 and CDs like they used to. So yeah, innovation comes when people see problems. So technology has helped a lot with the industry. Of course, along the way, there's some growing pains. Money's lost. A lot of piracy happens when there's innovation in the music industry, but as in the Napster case. But I don't think in the long run, and now we're seeing the industry turn around, and we're finally seeing people realize that it's a lot. Well, not finally; it's been happening for a while. People realize that streaming is a lot, and downloading. I guess when people still download, it's a lot more convenient than going to a torrent site or to going to Napster, and so it's a lot more convenient. So once it's good for the consumer, that's when I guess the real innovation happens, and everybody's happy.
Now, we've talked separately about innovation, though, in Latin music. Has that been a different pathway than innovation overall?
It is different. Well, let's say the real innovation happens, I guess. It's happening now, at least. The real innovation is happening in Silicon Valley and in Scandinavia, as we see with services such as Spotify and a lot of the other services coming out of, I guess, Finland, Norway. We see a lot of, there's a big tech scene in Scandinavia, and most of it happens also in Silicon Valley. Latin America seems to mirror those trends, and they adapt it to the needs of Latin America. I don't think there's any like new. I may be wrong. There could be a new service that I'm not aware of, but it mostly comes out of the U.S. and right now Scandinavia and Europe, than Latin America. But they seem to adapt to to the they adapt these technologies to the Latin America. They change the language, they change it for the needs. Latin America is not just one region that speaks Spanish. It's 14 or different countries or so that have very different cultures. So they try to adapt these technologies to meet everybody's needs. So it's not something uniform. So
I tend to hear people talk about Latin music as if it's one big element. And I've been hearing a lot about Latin music having really almost different approaches to technology, including a different relationship with YouTube. How is all this happening in terms of technology with Latin music, and is it any different between the elements of Latin genres or geographies or anything like that?
There is. In Latin America, I guess the behavior of the consumer is very different. So, for example, streaming is booming in Latin America right now. And why is it booming? Because there's a huge amount of piracy in Latin America. People didn't care, and they were just downloading like crazy, and people didn't care. People were like, well, who cares? We're hungry here. We don't need to spend money, and we're going to save money. We're not spending on music. But when streaming made it convenient, people started flocking to streaming. So the growth has been incredible. It has more growth than in the U.S., faster growth than in the U.S. And what happens is people are streaming. The only problem, I guess, is people are streaming the free tiers. They're not really subscribing to the paid tiers. They're okay with it, but they just, as far as because there's still no trust in credit cards for some reason. There's very little trust in banks. It's just a different mentality, and this is across the board in Latin America. So streaming has been booming because of that behavior. People wanted everything free, everything convenient, and so streaming has been incredible for everybody. And with the growth of mobile, it's just the penetration has been incredible. There's still a lot of room to grow. So it's a very, very interesting market. That has coincided with the growth of Latin music. especially Latin urban music, which is like our version of hip hop. It's not really hip hop, but it's they call it Latin urban, which is there's a guy called J Balvin right now. I'm just looking at the Spotify charts. He's number 2 in the world after Ed Sheeran, which above Taylor Swift. That's huge. We personally had Nicky Jam, has been huge for us, and he started growing. These guys started growing because of YouTube. They no longer needed to, I guess, to be on television for people to see them, but it was just a YouTube phenomenon. And Nicky Jam happened to be one of the biggest Latin sites on YouTube, I guess, destinations on YouTube, like channels on YouTube, and he that was a huge part of his success. Actually, during South by Southwest a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, they had the YouTube Red House where they always have it, and they had Nicky Jam was one of the 5 artists they had picked for the conference. So it's a huge deal. They're very savvy. The Latin urban artists are very savvy. They know how to use their socials very well, and that has changed everything. And that's why their music is heard all around the world.
So it provides a global, non-translated, no barriers to moving country to country platform that may or may not end up having much money coming to them for doing.
It's funny that you mentioned the non-translated, because sometimes, usually these artists are from Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico and Colombia mostly, but the language they use in their songs is very street, so nobody understands what they're saying, even if they speak Spanish. A lot of times they use these words like, what are they saying? What are they talking about? So it's kind of funny because the translation sometimes doesn't work in even in Latin America, especially in Argentina, if the guy is speaking with a Puerto Rican slang, and they have no idea what he's saying, but they love it. They love it. So yeah.
I thought it was just me because my Spanish is not very good.
No, you'd be surprised. That's funny you say that. No, yeah, and sometimes people even in Colombia say, what is he saying? What does he mean when he says this? So it's kind of funny. And people around the world don't care. It's just as long as it's a catchy chorus and you can dance to it and have fun. That's what they want. And so yes, it's easier for them to reach a global audience.
Cool. How are they making money? I mean, there's lots of battles about the relative value of streaming on YouTube versus some other platforms. I know artists oftentimes are really looking to merge concerts, brand integrations, etc., to try to pay off on a YouTube environment. Have you seen anything working really well for the Latin urban artists or other Latin artists in their YouTube environments?
Well, Latin urban artists, they're banking on live. They're making a lot of money on live shows. So they want their music out there for free. They're releasing tracks every 2 weeks. Sometime, I mean, in the fastest case, every 2 weeks, or at least every month. And they feature each other, just like they learn from the hip hop, market here. So yeah, you promote each other. You mention each other in songs, and you do featuring, and that's been huge for them. And they make a lot of money with live shows. So and some are getting into merchandising which is a new territory in Latin America. Yeah, believe it or not, merch is not a big deal. But yes, they're getting into merch. They're getting into huge revenues with live shows and some sponsorships. Yes, down there you'll see sponsorships with mobile companies and the telco companies. So yeah, they're very savvy when it comes to making additional money. So the downloads, maybe to the downloads and the streaming, could be just the icing on the cake for them. YouTube income, huge. If you look at the top 10 channels, Latin American channels, you'll probably see a couple that are from Latin urban artists.
So you've had the opportunity and privilege of being the innovation voice in a maybe a little more traditional space of distributing Latin music. What have been the challenges of standing in that spot?
Interrupting the status quo. People are very defensive when it comes to change. Say, "Oh, what is this guy going to teach us?" And I'm not trying to teach. Yeah, who is this guy? I'm not trying to teach. I'm just trying to more or less evangelize. So I say, hey, look, this is good for us. We should do this. I remember at first when we were one of the first monetized channels 10 years ago, and they were like, wow, we can't do that. That's piracy. Like, well, it's not really piracy. We're going to make some money off the videos. The pirates are going to upload it anyway. So we might as well have some control of what we're doing and monetize it. So we actually got in very early with YouTube. So it's been good for us. YouTube has been great for us. It's been a really good profit center for us. Then we got into other areas of deals with the different streaming companies, and it's been good. The growth of streaming has coincided with the growth of Latin urban. So I'm not really sure if it's a coincidence or if it's going to continue once musical tastes change. But streaming, there's also, again, I mentioned this already. There's huge growth potential because mobile penetration is not 100% yet. So there's a huge growth potential.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
Huge. So what has been your biggest surprise then in being this voice of innovation and evangelization in the companies you've worked with the artists you've worked with, et cetera? What's been your biggest surprise?
That people have adopted streaming so quickly and the rise of Latin urban. Latin urban was a dead genre here in the States. And down there, it was just a underground thing, and all of a sudden, it just came back. It was big in the early part of the century, then it died, and then it was dead for a while here. Radio stations, actually, one of the rock radio stations I was working for here in Miami, changed from alternative rock, like the heavier alternative rock, to Latin urban, and one day, I was like, oh my God, wow! And at some point here in Miami, we had 4 Latin urban stations, and that lasted about a year, and they disappeared because there was no real market for it. But now it changed again. So it was kind of Latin urban is the comeback kid of the Latin industry. Now Latin urban is a new pop. It's everybody wants to do a featuring with these Latin urban artists. Everybody. Now you have even Shakira doing featuring with Latin urban art. Everybody. Across the board, everybody wants. Enrique Iglesias. We all know he did his. He has Latin urban features and everything. So everybody wants to be part of the Latin urban movement now, and it's huge. If you look at the Latin Grammys, everything is Latin urban. So it's really taken over. I never thought that would happen. It just seemed like something so underground, and it wasn't like very with limited appeal. But no, now it's. I guess they softened a bit. It's more pop oriented, and so now it has mass appeal. But now it's worldwide. The biggest hit on YouTube, the biggest watched video on YouTube is a Latin urban track. So
such quick changes. So you've been seeing a lot of innovations over time. What do you see coming up the pike? Anything that you are excited about, or things that you see need to come and be changes?
I think the changes are going to happen with metadata and accounting, which seems to be the not sexy part of the business, but it's an important part because everything is data. So every song file needs to be correctly identified for people to be able to make money. So that has to be organized. We all hear about blockchain, where the files are going to be organized. We're going to know who's the composer, who's the writer, who's the producer, who's everything with blockchain. At least that's the promise. Before the promise was the celestial jukebox, which iTunes and Spotify do a great job of filling that need. But I think there's going to be growth with we need to have the files, the data organized, because that's a mess right now. Right now, there's a lot of services that, for example, Sound Exchange, they pay some. They're paying the wrong people. They're disputing the wrong tracks with the wrong people. There's a problem with ownership. Nobody knows who owns what. Some people know, but there's a lot of tracks that are in limbo. I guess right now there's a bunch of tracks that are they're just floating around. Nobody knows who owns them. There's partial ownership, and that's a problem with rights because it's a rights business at the end of the day, and that's what people get paid for, is for the rights, for the copyright, for their ownership, and that has to be organized. There's still a huge mess in finding out who owns what, and who should no. Actually, people know who owns what. It's just how do they pay them, and who's getting paid, who's not getting paid. That's a problem. So we're going to see probably, and we're already seeing a lot of growth in these, I guess, backbone companies who are developing better file identification, all these blockchain files and blockchain services.
Mm-hmm. Is it any different with Spanish language music?
We'll probably think there's more of a mess in the Spanish world. Probably, because of they would they had more of a traditional way of organizing, filing things on paper, handshake agreements. That's a problem because now we're seeing, oh, well, this song's from 1960. Yeah, well, my brother wrote that with his cousin, and yeah, well, where's your cousin? And we need his signature. We're seeing a lot of songs that can't be released here because of incorrect filing. So many songs can't be released here in the States because they're not properly identified, and if they're not properly identified, then we can't really release them. So that's a problem.
So other than your own wonderful company, are there other companies that you are excited about now or intrigued about?
Yes, I have total admiration for Cobalt. Cobalt, I think they're very progressive company. They may have been around for a while, but they seem like they came back out of nowhere. All of a sudden, boom! This new cool company that is very transparent with in real time accounting and real time performance, and I think that's important for any artist to see and managers to know. So everybody wants to know, exactly in real time. We can do this. We can do this in real time. We know the technology's there, and I think Cobalt offer that. That's a company I've always admired as far as a music business company. And the other one would be Dubset. Dubset is an up and coming, or already pretty much very well on their way company that identifies ownership in remixes, or identifies the remixes are a big part of electronic music, as we all know. Mm-hmm. But if they just grab a little sample, sometimes those samples don't get monetized. And Dubset is probably going to improve that. So they will identify the track and be able to find out who owns that little piece and be able to monetize it. So I think that's a good way, another possible profit center with Dubset.
Wow. You see a really interesting sliver of all of this. Do you have any last thoughts to share with us as to things that you are working on or heading towards or enjoying from your own view of the music business?
Well, I'm always looking for new things. So that's something every year I go to these shows. I want to say I have to. I really enjoy it. I go to these shows to look for latest technologies. There's a lot of good things coming out. I think.
Where do you go? I know that I think I saw you at SF Music Tech.
I go to SF Music Tech. I like South by Southwest is a good place to keep a finger on the pulse. I go to Midem in Cannes, France. Mm-hmm. I go to quite a few. I go to Indie Week in New York, which is a good place to see everybody from the industry. So I go to quite a few a year. So I have like a little tour circuit that I do. And I'm always going. I still go to panels. I still like to learn. I mean, you have to always learn. Always keep on learning. Very important. And I think for aspiring musicians, that you can't get enough knowledge in this industry. You can't. It's not like it used to, where you had a manager and you had everybody else taking care for your stuff. If you want a musician of the future needs to be very savvy and understand a little bit more of their craft than just the music. It doesn't hurt. It really helps a whole lot. I've found that the most successful artists today are the ones that are the most business savvy, who understand social networks, who understand where the money's coming from. And it's not like it used to be, where you just had, you had the manager handle all the stuff. Now you have to be savvy. So the musician of the future has to know a lot about technology. At least, I don't want to say the backbone part of technology, the coding, not necessarily, but know how to interact with their fans and know how to grow.
And especially as all of this keeps changing, as innovation keeps churning along and bringing us new solutions.
Correct. It's only going to get more technological. So.
Well, thanks for joining us. Appreciate the time and appreciate your sharing your thoughts with our podcast audience.
Thank you very much, Gigi. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that wraps up this podcast. Many thanks to the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation for being our hosts of this ongoing series. You can subscribe to us in all the usual places, or you can come find us at innovation.schoolofmusic.ucla.edu. Join us again to follow the other adventures that we will be tracking down in innovating music. Thanks again.